I've been married to Sarah for 5 years. When we first met, she was already climbing the corporate ladder in finance, incredibly ambitious with these detailed 5-year plans and clear career goals. I genuinely loved that fire in her eyes when she talked about her aspirations. Meanwhile, I was deep into building something with my college roommate Marcus. But whenever Sarah asked about my work, I kept things deliberately vague. I'd say stuff like consulting with Marcus on some projects or helping with tech development. She never really pushed for specifics, and I never volunteered them. Here's what Sarah never knew. Marcus, Chen, and I started our company in the worst apartment you can imagine. We're talking peeling wallpaper, furniture we found on the street, a broken air conditioner that made summers unbearable. We lived there for 2 years after graduation, spending every night hunched over laptops, surviving on energy drinks and dollar pizza slices. That cramped, overheated space is where Tech Vault Systems was born. I wrote every single line of the original code, every algorithm, every system architecture, every technical innovation that became our foundation. Marcus handled the business side because he's naturally charismatic and loves the spotlight. He thrives at investor meetings, on conference stages, doing press interviews. Me? I'd rather pull my own teeth out than give a public speech. So we made an agreement early on. He'd be the face, the CEO everyone sees and recognizes. I'd be the CTO, the technical backbone that stays invisible. No ego battles, just two friends playing to their strengths. It worked beautifully. The company exploded beyond anything we'd imagined in that terrible apartment. We're talking a $180 million valuation, massive government contracts, over 400 employees. Marcus's face is on magazine covers, he does TED Talks, gets invited to tech conferences worldwide. My code runs everything behind the scenes, every single process and system. And Sarah? She had absolutely no idea. I never directly lied, but I never corrected her assumptions either. She decided I was just some guy coasting on my successful friend's accomplishments, and I let her think that. At first, her little jabs about my supposed lack of ambition seemed almost cute. But as she climbed higher in her own career, those comments got sharper and more frequent. She'd come home excited about a promotion and then say things like, maybe you should actually try, like Marcus does. I'd nod and go back to debugging code that powered our $180 million company. Why didn't I tell her? I've asked myself this constantly. Part of it was genuine curiosity. I wanted to know if she'd love me for who I actually was, not for what I'd built or how much money I made. Another part was pride. I didn't want respect that came from a title. And honestly, I was testing her, seeing how far she'd take her assumptions about me being less than her. She never asked deeper questions, never really wanted to know what I did all day. She just constructed this entire narrative about me being a failure, and I let her because the truth was mine to control. Everything exploded about a year ago. Her parents threw this enormous party when she got a job offer from what she thought was some prestigious tech firm. Their house is like a museum, all imported marble and crystal chandeliers. The kind of place where you're afraid to breathe on anything. The entire extended family was there, plus her professional network, maybe 150 people total. I stood near the edge, holding wine I hadn't touched, watching everyone celebrate Sarah's achievement. I was genuinely proud of her. She'd worked hard and earned this opportunity. Then her mother Patricia stood up for a toast. She raised her glass high and announced loudly enough for everyone to hear, "To Sarah, for finally moving up in the world and leaving behind the dead weight and freeloaders." She looked directly at me when she said it. The whole room laughed. Not cruel laughter necessarily, but that knowing kind that tells you everyone's been thinking the same thing. I felt every eye on me, every judgment. But that wasn't even the worst part. Sarah turned to me with this perfected, mocking smile and said loud enough for the entire room, "Seriously, David, get a life. Stop constantly hanging around Marcus just to feel relevant. He's successful and accomplished. You're not." The room went completely silent. Her uncle coughed awkwardly, mumbled something about tough love, but nobody else said a word. I could have defended myself right then. Could have told everyone the truth. Instead, I just smiled. Not a weak smile, but a knowing one. Because Sarah had absolutely no idea whose signature was on her brand new paycheck. That night haunted me for weeks, not because it hurt, though it did, but because it clarified everything about who she'd become. She'd been taking shots at me for years. Little comments about how lucky I was to know Marcus, how I should be more driven. I'd let everyone slide. Not because I was weak, but because I was watching, learning who she really was when she thought I had nothing. She'd measured my worth against her narrow definition of success and found me lacking. I wasn't angry, just disappointed and curious about how she'd react when the truth finally came out. A few weeks after that disaster, Marcus called me one morning. I was in my home office reviewing complex code when his name appeared on my screen. Her resume just hit HR, he said immediately. Sarah applied for our senior financial analyst position. Her credentials are actually solid. You want me to reject it? I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the city below. Reject it? That would be easy. Keep my world separate. But that wasn't the point. I'd been letting her build her own story about me for years. This was a chance to see what she could do with a real opportunity, completely on her own merit. Let her go through the standard process, I told Marcus. If she's qualified, she's qualified. Keep everything completely fair. Marcus laughed. You're playing with fire, man. All right, I'll make sure HR keeps it legitimate. And they did. Sarah went through identical interviews and evaluations as every other candidate. Her application got zero special treatment either way. She earned that job entirely on her own abilities. She got the offer 3 weeks later. Senior financial analyst, $98,000 annually, full benefits. I was actually at headquarters that day, working in my private office on the executive floor that most employees don't know exists. The building is this massive glass and steel structure, all dramatic angles and open spaces designed to scream innovation. I'd personally selected the architect years ago, though nobody would guess. I was deep in a system update when Marcus stopped by, leaning in my doorway with a huge grin. She's downstairs right now, he said, walking through the lobby like she owns it already, still clueless. I nodded without looking up. Completely. He shook his head. You're genuinely crazy, man. Maybe I was, but this wasn't about games. It was about letting Sarah be completely herself without knowing who I was in the company hierarchy. No pretending, no adjusting her behavior because I'm her husband and technically her ultimate boss. Just authentic Sarah. I decided to take a walk through the building that afternoon. I rarely do this since I prefer staying invisible. Most employees know me as Marcus's friend, maybe a consultant who appears occasionally. That's exactly how I want it. The elevator dropped me to the main floor, and when the doors opened, I saw her. Sarah stood at reception, posture perfect, radiating confidence as she accepted her new employee badge. She wore a sharp blazer, hair pulled back flawlessly, looking every bit the professional she'd worked to become. I stayed back in the lunch crowd. She didn't see me, didn't glance my direction. Too focused on her moment. Watching her, I felt this strange mix of pride and sadness. Pride because she'd earned this legitimately. The hiring team had no clue she was my wife. HR has strict protocols, and I'd ensured her application went through the same process as anyone else's. But there was also this unexpected ache. She was stepping into a world I'd built from nothing, a place where my initials were literally etched into the foundation, and she was completely oblivious. Part of me wanted to walk over immediately and tell her everything. But timing matters, and that wasn't it. I went back upstairs and dove back into work. Her first few weeks at TechVault were apparently fantastic, according to reports. I heard bits through Marcus and some trusted HR contacts. She was settling in fast, charming her team, making strong impressions. Word got back that she'd started bragging in the break room about working near real power and influence, as if being in the same building as Marcus made her special. I could picture it perfectly. Her with expensive coffee, casually saying things like, "You can just tell he's the genius behind everything here." It didn't bother me much. I'd chosen to stay out of the spotlight. Let Marcus take the recognition. But hearing she thought I was nobody, just some guy desperately hanging around for scraps, stirred something uncomfortable in my chest. One afternoon, I got an email from Jennifer, an HR rep I've trusted since the startup days. She keeps me informed without asking uncomfortable questions. Her email was direct. Overheard Sarah in the break room today. She was discussing company structure with some analysts. Said something like, "There's supposed to be another founder, right? Some ghost or placeholder. Probably just a legal requirement. Marcus obviously runs everything. Thought you should know." I read it twice, jaw tight. A placeholder. A legal formality. That's what my own wife thought I was. Not the man who'd built this empire from a folding table in a terrible apartment, but just a name on paperwork. Irrelevant compared to Marcus's shine. Marcus texted almost immediately, like he'd sensed my mood. Heard Sarah spreading theories about you. Want me to correct her right now? I stared at my phone. For a moment, I imagined him walking to her desk and dropping the complete truth. I could almost see her face. The shock, the disbelief, the scramble to rewrite everything. It was tempting, but I typed back, not yet, let it develop naturally. The truth would come out when it was ready. Forcing it would ruin everything I'd been waiting for. I wanted her to discover it naturally, to feel the full weight when it landed. So I returned to work, losing myself in code where everything makes logical sense. Unlike people, unlike my wife. Then came the night that nearly exposed everything prematurely. It was past 9 and I was in the executive suite working on a software patch that had stumped our entire dev team for days. The office was empty except for the AC hum and occasional building creaks. This is my favorite time to work. No interruptions, just me and code. I had my laptop open, multiple diagnostic screens running, cold coffee forgotten on my desk. Then I heard them. Sharp heel clicks on hardwood, echoing down the hallway like fire shots. I glanced at the clock. Nobody should be here. The footsteps stopped outside my door. Before I could close my laptop, Sarah walked in. She froze in the doorway, eyes wide like she'd entered a restricted area. Her blazer was over one arm, hair slightly messy from a long day, but she still had that confident air. "What are you doing here?" she asked, voice sharp and accusatory. I leaned back, keeping my expression neutral. "Helping Marcus with some technical issues," I said calmly. Same vague answer I always gave. Technically true since Marcus had asked me to handle this patch personally. But it also let her fill in her own blanks. She rolled her eyes, stepping into the room. "Of course," she said, tone dripping with familiar pity and frustration. "You just can't let go of his coattails, can you?" The word stung, but I didn't show it. I'd heard variations 100 times. But tonight, sitting in this room with my code on the screen and the weight of everything I'd built around me, it landed differently. I could have corrected her immediately, explained how this company, this office, this moment existed entirely because of me. But I held back, just held her gaze, giving her nothing. She shifted her weight and clearly expecting me to argue or shrink away. When I didn't react, her confidence wavered slightly. "It's late, David," she said softer. "Why are you even in here? This is the executive suite." Before I could answer, Marcus walked in, tie loosened, tablet under his arm. He stopped short, glancing between us. "Hey," he said, nodding at Sarah before turning to me. "Ready to sign off on that patch?" The air shifted dramatically. Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Wait," she said slowly. "He signs things off?" Marcus froze, realizing his mistake. He looked at me, waiting for direction, but I gave him nothing. I just closed my laptop and stood. "Just wrapping up," I said casually. Sarah wasn't buying it. She crossed her arms, looking between us suspiciously. "Hold on, what do you mean, sign off? Since when are you involved like that?" Marcus tried smoothing it over. "He's involved," he said with an awkward smile. "Helps with big picture stuff sometimes." She laughed nervously. "Sure he is," she said, eyes locked on me, searching. I didn't give her anything, just grabbed my jacket. "Long day," I said to Marcus. "I'll finish tomorrow." I brushed past Sarah, caught her perfume, the same one since we met. For a split second, I remembered early days, her laughing over cheap wine, me promising her the world. But the memory faded. I didn't look back, but I felt her staring, her confusion following me down the hall. 2 weeks after that encounter, everything changed. I was home working through morning emails when Marcus texted, "Payroll glitch, HR scrambling, Sarah's asking questions." I leaned back, smirking. Payroll glitches are rare. My systems are tight. But when they happen, they leave trails. I knew where this was going. An hour later, another text. "She saw your name on her paycheck stub, authorization signature. She freaked out completely. Want me to handle it?" I typed back quickly. "No, let it play out." I could picture it perfectly. Sarah at her desk with her overpriced latte, opening her paycheck details like she does every payday. She's meticulous about finances. And there at the bottom, authorized by David Morrison, Chief Technology Officer. I imagined her squinting, thinking it was an error or joke. She probably laughed at first. But Sarah doesn't let things slide. She investigates. By noon, I got an email from Jennifer, flagged urgent. Sarah stormed into our office, paycheck in hand, demanding to know why your name was on it. Thought it was a mistake, asked if there was another David Morrison. I pulled the internal documentation. Founding charter, corporate ownership structure, stock distribution, everything. She went completely pale. Just sat down hard and stared at the documents like they were in a foreign language. Didn't speak for 10 minutes. Eventually collected the papers and left. Thought you should know. I read it twice. This was it. Yeah, Jennifer had shown Sarah the paperwork. All of it with my name prominent. David Morrison, co-founder and chief technology officer. Not a placeholder, but the person who'd built the engine powering the entire company. I closed the email and stood, walking to the window. The city stretched below. I didn't feel triumphant, just calm, like after a storm passes. Sarah knew now. Maybe not everything, but enough to shatter the story she'd built. She'd spent 5 years thinking I was less than her, and now she'd seen my name on the one thing she couldn't dismiss, her paycheck. That night, I got home before her. The house was quiet. I poured water and stood by the counter, waiting. When I heard her key, my stomach tightened. She stepped inside, heels clicking softer than usual. She set her bag down, glanced at me, gave a quick nod. "Good day?" I asked lightly. She hesitated. "Busy," she finally said. "I'm exhausted." Then she headed upstairs. I watched her go without a word about the paycheck. Part of me wanted to call her back, but I didn't. She needed time. The truth was out, raw and undeniable. A week later, we had the company gala. Marcus had planned it for months to celebrate landing a massive government contract. I usually skip these events, but Marcus basically ordered me. "You need to claim what you've built," he said firmly. "This isn't just my win, it's yours. You're showing up." So there I was in a ballroom straight out of a movie. Crystal chandeliers, champagne-carrying waiters, live jazz band. Tech Vault had gone all out. The room buzzed with energy. I adjusted my tie, the rented black suit feeling foreign but sharp. For once, I didn't look like the guy Sarah thought I was. Tonight, I'd step into the light. I spotted Sarah across the room with logistics, clipboard in hand, directing staff. She looked like she belonged. I kept my distance. Since the payroll incident, we'd barely spoken. She knew enough to question everything now. But she hadn't brought it up. Marcus found me at the bar. "You clean up well?" he said, handing me whiskey. "Ready for this?" I took a sip, the burn grounding me. As ready as I'll ever be. The band finished and the MC stepped to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us to celebrate a major milestone for Tech Vault Systems." The crowd applauded. The MC went through the usual speech, thanking the team, hyping the contract. Then he paused. None of this would be possible without the vision and dedication of our founders. Please welcome our co-founder and chief technology officer, David Morrison. A spotlight hit me, bright and blinding. The room erupted. Applause, gasps, murmurs rippling through like electricity. I felt every eye as I walked to the stage, steps deliberate. Cameras clicked, flashes popping everywhere. I didn't look at Sarah. I could feel her stare, heavy and shocked. I reached the podium, shook the MC's hand, turned to face hundreds of expectant faces. I'd never been one for speeches. Marcus was the talker. But I'd prepared something. "Thank you," I started, voice steady and caring. "This company started with one simple idea. Solve problems nobody else can solve. That's what we've done. And that's what we'll continue doing. Not because it's easy, but because it genuinely matters." I kept it brief, thanked the team, nodded to Marcus, who stood grinning near the stage. The crowd applauded louder, and I stepped back. As I left the stage, I caught it. Sarah near a pillar, champagne flute literally trembling in her hand. Her face was pale, lips parted like she'd witnessed something impossible. Our eyes met for one brief second, and I saw everything. Shock, realization, maybe even regret. Then she looked away, grip tightening on her glass. Back at the bar, I grabbed water, adrenaline still coursing through me. Marcus joined me. "Told you it would hit hard," he said quietly. "Yeah," I said. "You weren't wrong." He glanced at Sarah, now talking to a colleague, smile forced and movement stiff. She's completely rattled. What's your next move? Nothing, I said, setting down my glass. Ball's in her court now. The days after the gala felt charged with this unspoken tension. I went through my normal routine, but underneath was this constant awareness. Rachel hadn't said much since that night. I'd caught her staring sometimes, quick searching glances, but she hadn't brought anything up. It was late one evening, maybe a week after the gala, when she finally broke the silence. I was in the kitchen rinsing dishes from a dinner we'd eaten separately. She walked in, still in work clothes, heels abandoned by the door. I didn't turn around, kept scrubbing, waiting. Then I heard her voice, low but sharp, like she'd been holding it in. You should have told me. I set the pan down carefully, dried my hands on a towel, then turned to face her. She stood by the counter, arms crossed defensively, eyes fixed hard on me. Not quite angry, but something close. Told you what exactly? I asked, keeping my tone even though I knew precisely what she meant. Don't play dumb with me, she said, voice rising a fraction. About Tech Vault, about you being whatever you actually are. Co-founder, CTO, the person who built everything. Do you have any idea how stupid I looked standing there at that gala, holding my champagne like an idiot while everyone applauded for you? I leaned against the counter, holding her gaze steadily. Her words stung, but not like they used to. There was something raw in them now, something honest beneath the anger. It wasn't about making you look stupid, I said finally, voice calm but absolutely firm. You did that completely on your own. Her eyes widened, a flash of genuine hurt crossing her face before it hardened again into defensiveness. So this was what? Some kind of game? She snapped. Letting me think you were nobody? Letting me say all those things about you, about Marcus? So you could what, exactly? Prove some kind of point? I shook my head, stepping slightly closer but not crowding her. It wasn't a game, Sarah. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to love me for a title or a paycheck or status. I wanted to see who you'd actually be when you thought I had absolutely nothing to offer. She laughed, but it was bitter, almost strangled. And what did you see, David? A shallow, status-obsessed person who'd rather chase Marcus's shadow than actually look at her own husband. Her words hung heavy in the air between us. For a moment, I genuinely didn't know what to say. She wasn't entirely wrong, not at all. She'd spent years measuring me against her narrow idea of success, cutting me down to fit the box she'd made for me in her mind. But I didn't hate her for it. I just wanted her to finally see it clearly, to own it. I saw someone who's genuinely smart, I said quietly. Someone who's driven and capable, who earned her place at that company on her own merit. But yes, I also saw someone who decided I wasn't enough before she ever bothered asking who I actually was. She flinched visibly, her arms dropping to her sides. For a second, I genuinely thought she might cry. But Sarah doesn't break like that. Instead, she straightened her spine, voice trembling slightly but still sharp. You could have asked me to stop. You could have said something, anything at all, instead of just sitting there smiling like it didn't hurt you. Why didn't you ever say anything? I looked at her, really looked at the woman I'd married. Because I didn't want to fight for your respect, I said simply. I wanted you to give it freely. Not because I'm the CTO of some company, but because I'm your husband. That should have been enough. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, eyes glistening but managing to hold back whatever emotion was building. The silence stretched thick and uncomfortable until she finally turned away, voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know how to see you. Not like this, not as this person. She walked out, footsteps soft on the hardwood, leaving me alone with the weight of everything we'd just laid bare. I didn't follow her, didn't feel the need. She'd wanted to justify herself, to somehow make this my fault for keeping secrets. But I'd given her the unvarnished truth. I wasn't there to punish her, but I wasn't there to beg for forgiveness either. The next several days were painfully quiet. Both of us moving through our house like strangers sharing a lease agreement. I threw myself completely into work, debugging complex code, preparing for major tech rollouts, anything to keep my mind occupied and away from the ache in my chest. At Tech Vault, I heard through channels that she was keeping her head down, still performing her job well, but without her usual confident swagger. Part of me wondered if she'd quit, walk away from the company now that she knew my actual role. But she didn't. She continued showing up, filing her reports, doing her work. That meant something, at least. Then I did something I hadn't planned. I was at my desk one morning when I pulled out a small box I'd purchased on impulse the day before. A high-quality leather journal, the kind Sarah used to carry when we first started dating and still dreamed together over late-night takeout. I grabbed a pen and wrote a simple note. Sarah, you're talented and capable. You earned your place here legitimately. This was never about revenge. It's about truth. David. I didn't overthink it or try to make it poetic. Just the truth, plain and clear. The way I'd always tried to be with her even when she couldn't see it. I drove to the office that afternoon, the box sitting on my passenger seat. I didn't go to my usual executive floor office. Instead, I headed down to Sarah's desk, tucked in a corner of the finance department. She wasn't there, probably in a meeting somewhere. So I simply set the box down with the note folded inside and walked away quickly before anyone could ask questions. It felt strange leaving something for her like that. No explanation, no ceremony, no witnesses. But it wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic moments. It was about giving her something real and tangible, something she could hold, and then letting her decide completely on her own what to do with it. I didn't hear anything from her about it. Not that day, not the next day, not all week. Part of me wondered if she'd simply tossed it out, too proud to accept anything from me after everything that had happened. But I deliberately didn't dwell on it. I'd said what I needed to say. The rest was entirely up to her now. A few days later, Marcus mentioned something interesting during a casual check-in. She's been asking questions about the charity program, he said, leaning casually against my doorframe. The tech education workshops for underprivileged kids. Wanted to know how we select locations, who funds them, all the details. Sound familiar? I looked up from my screen, hands pausing on the keyboard. Yeah, I said, keeping my tone completely neutral. That sounds like something I care deeply about. He laughed, shaking his head knowingly. Man, she's digging into your stuff. That's been your personal project for years. She never showed any interest before now. I shrugged, turning back to my work. Maybe she's just curious about company initiatives. Marcus didn't buy my casual tone, but he let it go, heading out with a promise to grab drinks later. I sat there staring at code on my screen, but my mind elsewhere. Sarah asking detailed questions about the educational programs I'd poured my heart and resources into, quietly, behind the scenes, the way I'd always preferred doing meaningful things. It wasn't an apology, wasn't some big declaration, but it was definitely something. A step maybe, however small, towards seeing me as more than just the guy she'd mocked at her parents' party. That night I got home late after a particularly long debugging session. The house was dark except for a single light in the kitchen. Sarah was sitting at the table, laptop open, papers spread around her in organized chaos. She didn't look up as I walked in, but I immediately saw it. The leather journal I'd given her, open to a page filled with her neat, precise handwriting. My note wasn't visible, probably tucked away somewhere private, but just seeing the journal being used hit me harder than I'd expected. I grabbed a glass of water, kept my movements deliberately quiet, not wanting to disturb whatever she was working on. As I headed toward the stairs, I caught a glimpse of her laptop screen. A proposal draft. Something about significantly expanding the tech workshops to more schools across different districts. I didn't stop walking, didn't say anything. Just kept going. In bed later, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking. I didn't need her to thank me. Didn't need her to explicitly say she'd read the note or appreciated the gift. What I needed, what I'd always fundamentally needed, was to know I'd built something that genuinely mattered, not just in code or contracts or company valuations, but in the way it actually touched and improved people's lives. Those educational programs were a huge part of that mission. If she was picking up that thread now, even just a little bit, it meant something real. Not a victory, not a reconciliation, but a shift. Quiet and genuine, like the first subtle light of dawn after an endless night. The real turning point came a few weeks later at yet another family brunch. Patricia's favorite upscale restaurant. Same white tablecloths and ghost-like waiters. Same extended family ready to pass judgment. I sat across from Sarah, surrounded by her family's constant chatter, her cousins swapping gossip, her father droning endlessly about golf, Uncle Richard asking for more coffee louder than necessary. It used to make my skin genuinely crawl. But this time I felt different. More grounded, more centered in myself. Sarah was noticeably quieter than usual. Her fork moved slowly through her eggs Benedict, eyes occasionally drifting to the window like her mind was somewhere else entirely. I didn't push her to talk or engage. The past few weeks had been heavy with unspoken things. I was content to simply let things breathe naturally. The conversation inevitably turned to work, as it always did with her family. Patricia leaned forward, expensive pearls catching the light, and asked Sarah about her job at Tech Vault. "It's such a prestigious company, dear," she said, voice dripping with maternal pride. "You must feel incredibly lucky to be part of Marcus Chen's vision and leadership." I took a sip of coffee, hiding a slight smirk behind my cup. Marcus's vision. That's what they all genuinely thought. What Sarah had thought too until very recently. Sarah didn't answer immediately, just nodded with tight lips. I wondered what was going through her mind at that moment. Whether she was replaying the gala, my name on her paycheck, the journal sitting on her kitchen table. Then her aunt, a woman with a voice that carries across any room, turned directly to me, fork waving dramatically in my direction. "So, David," she announced loud enough to pull every single eye at the table to me, "still trying to make something of yourself? Or are you just permanently riding on Marcus's coattails?" The table went awkwardly quiet. A few nervous chuckles broke the silence. It was the exact same dig I'd heard literally 100 times at these gatherings over the years. But today it hit completely differently. I opened my mouth to give my usual, vague, deflecting answer. But Sarah spoke first. Her voice cut through the air like a knife through butter. "He's already made something," she said, tone steady and firm, not loud but carrying enough weight to stop the entire room cold. "Everything, actually. He built everything." I froze completely, coffee cup halfway to my lips. Every single head at that table turned first to her, then to me, the weight of her words sinking in like stones into water. Patricia's eyebrows shot up dramatically. Richard coughed into his napkin. Her aunt just stared like she'd completely misheard. I looked directly at Sarah, our eyes meeting across the table. For the first time in what felt like years, I didn't see anger or defensiveness or resentment in her gaze. Just raw, unguarded truth. She didn't smile, didn't soften her expression. Just held my gaze steadily like she was daring anyone in that room to challenge her statement. Nobody did. Nobody said a word. The moment stretched and then passed. Conversation gradually picking up again, but much more cautiously, but something had fundamentally shifted between us. Heavy and real, like we'd both stepped through a door we couldn't go back through. I set my cup down, pulse steady, but mind absolutely racing. She'd never done anything like that before. Never stood up for me publicly, not like this, not in front of her family where image and perception meant absolutely everything. I didn't know exactly what it meant for us going forward, but it felt like something had genuinely settled. Like the ground beneath our relationship had finally stopped its constant shifting. The rest of the brunch blurred into background noise. Polite small talk, clinking glasses and silverware. Patricia steering conversation towards safer, less confrontational topics. I played along, nodding when appropriate, but my focus stayed primarily on Sarah. She didn't say much else after that moment, just ate her food and answered questions with brief, polite responses. When we finally left, she walked beside me to the car. Our steps were perfectly in sync, the silence between us not heavy or uncomfortable, but thoughtful, like we were both carrying and processing the same significant weight. In the car driving home, I waited to see if she'd say something, explain or elaborate or backtrack. But she just looked out the window, fingers absently tracing the edge of her purse. I didn't push or probe. I'd spent years waiting for her to actually see me clearly. Now that she had, at least enough to publicly defend me, I wasn't going to demand more or rush whatever process she was going through. I simply drove us home, the city slipping past the windows. At home, she went to the kitchen, pouring herself water while I hung up my jacket by the door. I could have asked her about what happened, could have said, "Why did you do that?" or "What's changed for you?" But I didn't. Instead, I grabbed my laptop and headed to my home office. Routine and work had always been my anchor, and I needed that stability now to keep from overthinking everything. Sarah didn't follow me, didn't call me back for some big emotional conversation. She just moved through the house, her presence quiet but steady, like a shadow that didn't weigh me down anymore. Later that night, I found her in the living room, curled up on the couch with that leather journal I'd given her, scribbling something I deliberately didn't try to see. I paused in the doorway for a moment, just watching her. She looked different somehow. Not softer exactly, but less guarded, less defensive. Like she'd let go of something heavy she'd been carrying for far too long. I didn't say anything, didn't announce my presence. Just grabbed a book from the shelf and sat in the chair across from her. The silence was comfortable for once. No anger, no accusations, no walking on eggshells. Just two people sharing the same space without any desperate need to fill it with words or explanations. I thought about the long road we'd traveled together, her constant jabs and cutting comments, my deliberate silence and secret keeping, the slow unraveling of all her assumptions about who I was. I'd built Tech Vault from absolutely nothing, turned a crazy dream into a reality that now paid her salary and employed hundreds of people. I'd done it all without needing or wanting her applause or validation. But earlier today, when she'd spoken up firmly at that brunch, it wasn't applause she'd given me, it was respect. Quiet, unforced, genuine respect. The kind I'd stopped hoping for or expecting years ago. It didn't magically fix everything between us. Didn't erase the years of distance and accumulated hurt we'd traded back and forth. But it was enough to make me see her differently now. To wonder genuinely if we could maybe find some new way forward. Not necessarily as the husband and wife we'd been before, but perhaps as two people who finally understood each other clearly. As I turned a page in my book, I realized I was genuinely okay with whatever came next for us. We'd quite likely go our separate ways eventually. Too much had broken and shattered between us to realistically pretend otherwise. But that idea didn't scare me anymore. I'd built a life and a legacy that stood firmly on its own, with or without her in it. And I'd keep building, keep solving impossible problems, keep chasing what genuinely mattered to me. She'd do the same, I figured. Carving out her own path with that fierce fire I'd always genuinely admired about her. Even during the times when it burned me, the clock on the wall ticked steadily on, the room soft with warm lamplight. No dramatic music swelled in the background. No grand gestures marked this particular moment as special. Just us sitting there, in comfortable silence, seeing each other clearly and honestly for what felt like the first time in years. It wasn't a happy ending, not the kind people write fairy tales and romance novels about, but it was real and true and honest. And for me, sitting there in that moment, that was genuinely enough. I closed my book eventually, set it carefully aside, and let the quiet hold both of us gently, knowing that whatever came next in our lives, whether together or apart, I'd face it the exact same way I always had. Steady, sure, and completely ready for the truth, lead the way forward. So that's where I am right now, months after all of this started. My wife spent years systematically calling me a failure, mocking me in front of her family and friends, building this elaborate narrative about me being a nobody who was pathetically riding my successful friend's coattails to feel relevant. And when she finally discovered that I was actually the person who built the entire company she worked for, the one signing her paychecks, the one who created everything she thought belonged to someone else, our entire relationship imploded and had to be completely rebuilt from the ground up. We see each other now, truly see each other for who we actually are as people. But it might genuinely be too late to fix what broke so fundamentally between us. Sometimes the truth doesn't set you free the way people always say it will. Sometimes it just shows you who people really are when they think you have nothing, and who you are in response to that revelation. And you know what? That clarity, as painful and difficult as it continues to be to sit with every single day, honestly feels like enough for me right now. It has to be.